The stone lid of the cistern was a perfect circle of granite, 3 feet across and a foot thick, sealed to the earth by 50 years of rain and roots. Ilara worked the iron pry bar into the seam, her slight frame braced against the unyielding weight. Sweat traced clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. Beside her, a scruffy brown dog with intelligent eyes and mismatched ears whined softly, a low thrum of concern in his chest. His name was Moss, and he did not like the dark smell that puffed from the crack she was making. Each time the bar groaned, he nudged her hand with his cold nose, a silent question. She just grunted, shifting her weight, her knuckles white. This was all her mother had left her. The small, failing plot of land, a mortgaged cabin, and a key to a lockbox containing a single, cryptic instruction. The cistern is your future. Do not be afraid of the dark. The lid finally gave with a deep, sucking sound, like the earth itself exhaling. It scraped across the flagstones she had cleared, leaving a pale scar on the weathered rock. The air that rose from the opening was cool and ancient, smelling of damp stone, deep soil, and something else, a faint metallic tang of forgotten water. Ilara peered in. A wooden ladder, its rungs slick with a fine green film, descended into perfect blackness. Moss whined again, louder this time, placing a paw on her knee. "I have to, boy," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "There's nothing else." She checked the knots on the rope she'd tied around the nearby oak, slung a canvas bag over her shoulder, and swung her legs over the edge. Her boots found the first rung. It held. She descended, one rung at a time, the circle of blue sky shrinking above her until it was just a distant coin of light. The space was larger than she'd imagined. Her lantern cast a flickering golden glow across walls of carefully fitted stone, curving in a gentle 30-foot diameter circle. The floor was packed earth, surprisingly dry, sloping toward a central drain. It was not a simple well. It was a room. Against the far wall sat a heavy, sea-worn chest bound in iron. It was not locked. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, were not coins or heirlooms, but things of a different value. There were thick, leather-bound journals filled with her mother's elegant, precise script. There were rolled schematics drawn in charcoal and ink, detailing strange angles and structures. There were specialized tools, glass cutters, strange trowels, a set of finely balanced chisels. Her mother, a woman Ilara remembered as a quiet gardener who kept to herself, had been an engineer of some secret, radical sort. Ilara spent hours down there, the lantern hissing, Moss's occasional anxious bark echoing from the world above. She read of hydrology, thermal mass, and passive solar gain. She looked at drawings of a sunken hearth, a clever chimney system that used convection, and angled shafts designed to catch the low winter sun. It was not a cistern. It was the foundation for a home, a sanctuary. When she finally climbed out, blinking in the harsh afternoon light, Mr. Silas was leaning on the fence that separated their properties. He was a man made of leather and skepticism, his face a roadmap of hard seasons. He gestured with his chin toward the open hole. "Cleaning out the old well, Ilara." His voice was gravelly, not unkind, but heavy with the certainty of his own experience. "Don't expect much. Went dry in the summer of '78. Never held water since." Ilara wiped her hands on her trousers. "It's not for water." Silas squinted, his gaze drifting from her determined, soot-stained face to the open pit. "Then what's it for? A root cellar? It's too deep for that. You'll get rot." He spoke in long, rolling sentences of dismissal, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent fighting this very land. "Whatever you're thinking, girl, it's a fool's errand." That hole is a problem, not a solution. Best to fill it in before a cow breaks a leg. Wait until winter. You'll see. Ilara looked from the man to the dark circle in the ground, her mother's journals a tangible weight in her bag. She felt the truth of the plans, a quiet certainty that settled deep in her bones. She met his gaze, her own voice small but firm. I have a plan. The first phase of the work was pure, punishing labor. For 2 weeks, she did nothing but haul out the accumulated silt and debris from the cistern floor. She rigged a simple pulley to the oak, lowering a bucket and hauling it up, hand over hand, hundreds of times a day. Each bucketful was a history of the place: damp earth, smooth river stones, rotted leaves, the occasional fragment of old pottery. Her hands, soft from a youth spent more with books than with shovels, blistered, then bled, then hardened into thick, calloused pads. Her back ached with a fire that never quite went out, and at night she would fall into her cot, too exhausted to dream. Moss was her constant shadow. He would lie at the edge of the cistern, his head on his paws, watching the bucket descend and ascend. When she emerged at dusk, he would greet her with a flurry of licks and happy whimpers, as if she had returned from a long journey. Mrs. Gable, who ran the general store in the small village a mile down the road, stopped by with a basket of bread and preserves. She was a woman whose kindness was a form of gentle smothering. She saw the raw, red skin of Ilara's palms and clucked her tongue. Child, what are you doing to yourself? This is no work for a young woman alone. Your mother, bless her soul, would have a fit if she saw you like this. That hole is a menace. Silas is right. You'll catch your death of cold down there before the first frost. I'm fine, Mrs. Gable, Ilara said, accepting the bread. Thank you. Fine. You're worn to a nub. There are good men in this town who would help you fill that thing in for a hot meal. Let the past be the past. This is my home, Ilara said quietly, a statement of fact that allowed no argument. Mrs. Gable sighed, the sound of a gentle wave receding from a stone shore. Stubborn, just like her. Once the floor was cleared to the hard-packed clay her mother had described, the real work began. Following the schematics, Ilara used a pickaxe to begin carving into the earthen walls. She was not digging randomly. She was excavating 3 precise channels, each angled upward toward the surface at a carefully calculated 47 degrees. It was slow, nerve-wracking work. A wrong move could cause a collapse. She shored up the tunnels with timber she salvaged from a collapsed shed, her cuts precise, her joints tight. The tunnels terminated just below the surface of the ground, and for the final few feet, she worked from above, digging down to meet them. Next came the glass. In the back of the barn, under a mountain of moldy hay, she found the crates her mother's journal had mentioned. Inside, packed in straw, were 24 thick, heavy panes of glass, each an inch thick and rippled with imperfections. They were old, salvaged from a factory greenhouse decades ago. Using a winch and a system of ramps, she lowered each pane into the cistern. It took her an entire day to move just 3 of them. Finn, the blacksmith's son, came by to deliver a newly sharpened axe head she'd ordered. He was quiet like she was, with thoughtful eyes and hands stained permanently with soot. He watched her struggle with one of the heavy panes, his brow furrowed not with judgment, but with curiosity. He didn't offer platitudes or warnings. He just asked, "What are they for?" Ilara paused, grateful for a question that wasn't a dismissal. "Light wells," she said, "to catch the winter sun." He nodded slowly, looking from the heavy glass to the angled tunnels she had dug. He traced the angle with his eye, imagining the arc of the sun. "The light will come in low then, from the south." Yes. He didn't say it was crazy. He didn't say it wouldn't work. He just said, "You'll need good seals. Pitch and oakum would work best. My father has plenty." He left without another word, but the next morning, a bucket of black, fragrant pitch and a thick roll of oakum were sitting by her doorstep. It was the first gesture of help that didn't feel like an attempt to stop her. Fitting the glass was the most delicate operation yet. She built frames of seasoned oak, caulked them with the oakum, and sealed them with hot pitch that burned her fingers. She set the panes into the tops of the tunnels, flush with the ground, then covered the edges with carefully arranged stones and packed earth, creating a watertight seal. From below, the effect was astonishing. 3 rectangles of muted, milky light now illuminated the space, transforming it from a dark hole into a subterranean chamber. Moss, on his first trip down the ladder after the glass was installed, sat in one of the pools of light, blinking, as if he were sunning himself in a meadow. The centerpiece of her mother's design was the hearth. It was to be built in the very center of the room, directly beneath a disguised flue that would vent through the old oak tree's hollow trunk. This was the most audacious part of the plan, the part that felt like magic. She spent a week laying the fire brick her mother had stored, mixing mortar with sand from the creek bed. She built a round, low-walled hearth, and from its side, a stone-lined channel that sloped gently up and into the cistern wall, where it connected with a vertical shaft she'd painstakingly chiseled out. From there, she ran a triple-walled stovepipe up through the earth and into the hollow of the ancient oak, a detail so clever it made her ache with a renewed sense of her mother's quiet genius. The day she first lit a fire was the day the first snows came. Not a blizzard, just a gentle, insistent dusting that clung to the branches and outlined the stones. Down below, she stacked kindling in the new hearth, her heart hammering against her ribs. Moss sat beside her, his tail giving a single, hopeful thump against the packed earth. She struck a match. The kindling caught, crackling softly. Small flames licked at the larger logs. For a terrifying moment, a puff of smoke drifted into the room, and she felt a surge of despair. This was it. This was the failure everyone had predicted. But then, as the fire grew hotter, a draft took hold. The smoke wavered, then began to pull, a steady, invisible river flowing into the stone channel and disappearing. She held her breath, watching. The air in the room remained clear and sweet. The fire burned cleanly, its warmth already beginning to push back against the subterranean chill. Smoke was indeed rising from the top of the old oak tree, a thin gray plume that dissipated into the white sky, looking for all the world like the tree itself was breathing a sigh of relief. She sat on the floor, watching the flames dance, and felt a profound sense of peace. Moss rested his head on her lap. The light from the glass wells was soft and gray, filtering through the thin layer of snow above. It was warm. It was safe. It was working. The seasons turned with a brutal, unforgiving rhythm. The first snow was a gentle promise. The storms that followed were a threat. The wind howled down from the north, piling drifts against the cabin, rattling its poorly fitted windows. The temperature dropped and then dropped again. By December, the valley was locked in a deep and bitter cold. Ilara spent most of her time in the cistern now. She had moved in her cot, a small table, and her mother's books. She had stockpiled firewood, stacking it neatly along one curved wall. Her stores of preserved food, dried herbs, and sacks of flour and beans were arranged on shelves she had built into another. The air was cool, but never freezing, the great mass of the earth around her acting as insulation. The hearth provided a constant, steady warmth, and the pools of light from the sunwells, even on the grayest days, were enough to read by. Up above, the community hunkered down. Smoke from their chimneys was a constant prayer against the cold. but the winter was harder than any in recent memory. Mr. Thorne, the town elder and wealthiest landowner, lost half a herd of cattle when a blizzard buried their feeding troughs under 10 feet of snow. He'd scoffed openly at Alara's project in the autumn. "A hole in the ground," he'd declared at the general store. "A memorial to foolishness. She should be selling that land, not digging in it like a badger." The real test came in late January. The sky turned a strange, bruised purple, and the air grew unnaturally still. Silas, who could read the weather in his bones, stopped by her cabin, his face grim. "Blue norther coming," he said, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "Haven't seen a sky like this since I was a boy. The kind of storm that kills things." He looked toward the cistern, its entrance now just a slight mound under the snow, marked only by the oak tree. He shook his head, a gesture that was less derision and more a kind of pity. "Hope you've got enough wood, girl." "I'll be fine," she said. The storm hit that night. It wasn't just snow, it was ice. A freezing rain fell for hours, coating every surface in a thick, clear sheath. Branches as thick as a man's thigh snapped under the weight, falling with a sound like pistol shots. The power lines, a modern marvel Thorne had paid to have run up the valley, went down within the first hour. The wind rose to a demonic shriek, driving ice pellets with such force they scoured the paint from the north-facing walls of the cabins. Down in her shelter, Alara felt none of it. The roar of the wind was a distant hum, the earth absorbing its fury. The fire in the hearth crackled merrily. She sat reading one of her mother's journals, Moss asleep at her feet, his paws twitching as he dreamed. The only indication of the storm's severity was the sound of the oak tree groaning above her under the strain of its icy armor. The light from the wells dimmed as a thick crust of ice formed over the glass. But a faint, ethereal glow still filtered through, turning the room a soft, tranquil blue. She was woken from a doze by a frantic pounding, not at the cabin door, but on the stone lid of the cistern itself. Moss shot up, barking, a deep, protective roar that echoed in the enclosed space. Alara grabbed her lantern and climbed the ladder. Pushing open the heavy lid took all her strength against the weight of the new ice. The figure silhouetted against the swirling, ice-filled darkness was Mrs. Gable, her face a mask of terror, her shawl frozen stiff around her shoulders. "Alara, thank God! Our chimney, the ice, it's blocked it completely. The house is filling with smoke. We can't get a fire to draw, and it's so cold. George is trying to break it free, but—" Her words tumbled out, each one a puff of white. "Come down," Alara said, her voice calm. She helped the trembling woman descend the ladder. Mrs. Gable stepped onto the warm floor of the cistern and stopped, her mouth falling open. She looked from the glowing hearth to the neatly stacked wood, the shelves of food, the soft light. She stared as if she had stepped into another world. "Oh, my dear child," she whispered, tears freezing on her eyelashes. Within the hour, more came. Finn arrived, supporting his elderly father, whose own workshop roof had partially collapsed. Then came Silas, his face ashen. The weight of the ice had brought down the main beam of his barn, trapping his livestock. He had managed to free a few, but the rest— He couldn't finish the thought. He stood in the center of Alara's shelter, his skeptical eyes taking in the impossible reality of it. The warmth, the safety, the clean air. He looked at the flue, tracing its path to the wall, a deep furrow in his brow. He looked at the soft light filtering through the ice-encased glass. Finally, his eyes met Alara's. The accumulated certainty of a lifetime of conventional wisdom crumbled in his gaze. He opened his mouth, then closed it. All he could manage was a quiet, ragged whisper that was both an apology and a revelation. "You had a plan." By dawn, there were 17 people in the cistern. They huddled together, sharing blankets and hot mugs of tea Ilara brewed on the hearth. Mr. Thorne arrived last, his pride in tatters. His grand modern house with its electric heat was as cold as a tomb. He, the man who had called her a badger, now sought refuge in her burrow. He did not speak, but sat on a crate, staring into the flames, humbled by a force of nature and the quiet foresight of the young woman he had ridiculed. The cistern, her mother's legacy, had become an ark. It was filled with the quiet sounds of survival, the crackle of the fire, the murmur of hushed voices, the steady breathing of a community that had been broken by the storm and was now being sheltered by the very idea they had dismissed as madness. Outside, the world was frozen and shattered. But down in the earth, in the warm, gentle light, there was life. The blue norther raged for 2 days and 3 nights. When the wind finally died and the sun rose on a world encased in glittering, deadly ice, the valley was unrecognizable. Trees were splintered, roofs were caved in, and a profound silence had fallen. The 17 survivors emerged from the cistern, blinking in the impossibly bright light, into a landscape of devastation. But they were alive. They were warm. They had not frozen in their beds. The aftermath was a period of slow, arduous rebuilding, but something fundamental had shifted in the valley's consciousness. Ilara's cistern was no longer Ilara's folly. It was the shelter. People came not to mock, but to learn. Silas, his skepticism replaced by a convert's zeal, was the first. He brought a notebook and spent a full day with Ilara, asking quiet, practical questions. How deep did you set the glass? What angle? How did you mix the mortar for the fire brick? Ilara, who had always spoken in short, declarative sentences, found herself explaining her mother's principles. She unrolled the old schematics on the table, their edges soft with use, and traced the lines with her finger. Finn became her partner in the dissemination of the knowledge. He was a natural craftsman, able to see the logic in the designs and translate them into practical steps. He helped her draft clearer, simpler versions of the plans that others could follow. They worked together in the quiet evenings, the lantern light throwing their shadows against the curved stone walls. A comfortable silence grew between them, punctuated by the scratch of his charcoal on paper and the soft rustle of her turning the pages of her mother's journals. It was a partnership forged not in romance, but in shared purpose and mutual respect. Mr. Thorne, humbled and deeply shaken by his near-death experience, offered funding. He paid for materials, for glass to be brought in from the city, for tools and supplies. His wealth, once a source of distance, became a community resource. He never spoke of the days he had dismissed her, but his actions were a loud and clear apology. Families began to dig. All that spring and summer, the valley was filled with the sound of shovels and pickaxes striking the earth. They were not building cisterns. They were building homes. Each one was slightly different, adapted to the specific contours of the land, but they all followed the core principles of Ilara's mother's design. Subterranean, insulated by the earth, warmed by a central hearth, and lit by the low winter sun. By the time the first snows of the next winter fell, the valley was transformed. Dotted across the landscape were low, grassy mounds with stone-lined entrances, each with a plume of smoke rising from a disguised flue. The community gathered in Ilara's shelter for the winter solstice. It was warm and crowded, filled with the smell of roasting meat and mulled cider. They were no longer isolated individuals bracing for the cold, but a collective, secure in the knowledge that they were safe. Ilara sat by the hearth, Moss's head in her lap, and watched the faces glowing in the firelight. She had not sought to lead or to change anyone. She had simply built her home, and in doing so, had shown everyone else how to build theirs. Her quiet persistence had become their shared salvation. Years passed, the seasons turned, each winter a confirmation of the wisdom they had embraced. The sunken homes became the defining feature of the valley, a testament to a new way of living in harmony with the harsh land. Children were born who had never known the fear of a winter storm, who played on the grassy roofs of their homes in the summer and slept soundly by the fire in the winter. Ilara and Finn never married in a formal sense, but they built a life together, a quiet partnership of shared work and deep, unspoken affection. Their home, the original Cistern, remained the heart of the community, a place for gatherings, for learning, for shelter. Moss grew old, his muzzle turned gray, his mismatched ears drooped a little lower, and his intelligent eyes grew cloudy with age. He moved slower, his joints stiff, preferring to lie on the warm hearthstones for most of the day. He had been her first believer, her only witness during the long months of solitary labor. He had watched her bleed and sweat and despair, and he had met it all with a steady, trusting presence. One autumn evening, as the air grew crisp and the leaves of the great oak turned to gold, he rested his head in her lap and gave a long, soft sigh. His breathing slowed, became shallow, and then simply stopped. There was no struggle, no pain. It was a peaceful drift into silence. Ilara sat with him for a long time, her hand resting on his still warm flank, the fire crackling beside them. The next morning, she and Finn buried him on the small hill overlooking the cistern, beneath the branches of the oak tree that had served as his chimney. They marked the spot with a simple, flat river stone. There were no words carved on it. None were needed. More years passed, spooling out like thread. Ilara's hair turned the color of winter snow. Her hands, once calloused from labor, became gnarled with arthritis. But she still knew her way around the journals, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of her mother's script. She became the valley's quiet matriarch, the keeper of the knowledge. Young couples, ready to build their own home, would come to the cistern. She would welcome them with a cup of herbal tea and unroll the old schematics, her voice a soft, steady murmur as she explained the principles of thermal mass and the importance of the 47-degree angle. She never lectured, she just shared what she knew, a legacy passed from her mother, through her, to the future. Finn passed away in his sleep one spring, as peacefully as Moss had. Ilara mourned him with a quiet grief that settled into the lines of her face. She continued to live in the shelter, her movements slower, more deliberate. The community cared for her, bringing her food, chopping her firewood, ensuring the hearth never went cold. They were repaying the debt, not just to her, but to the idea she represented. She lived to be 87 years old. She died on a winter's night, tucked in her cot by the fire, the same way she had slept for more than 60 years. She was found the next morning by a young woman who had come to ask about reinforcing a wall, a journal clutched loosely in her hand, a small, serene smile on her lips. The entire valley turned out for her burial. They laid her to rest on the hill beside Finn and the unmarked stone that covered Moss. They did not mourn with loud wails, but with a profound, respectful silence. They stood for a long time, looking out over the valley she had saved, at the dozens of homes nestled into the earth, each one a testament to her stubborn, quiet faith. Afterward, the community gathered. They chose the largest, smoothest slab of granite they could find from the quarry upriver. A stonemason, the grandson of a man she had sheltered during the Blue Norther, spent a month carving the inscription. They placed the stone not at her grave, but at the entrance to the first shelter, the original cistern, which was to be preserved as a historical site, a library for the plans and journals. The epitaph was simple, carved in deep, clear letters that would withstand the wind and the ice for centuries to come. It did not speak of her birth or her death. It spoke of her life's work, echoing the words that had been uttered first in mockery, then in awe, and were now etched in stone as a permanent tribute. It read, Ilara. She had a plan. She made a home.